Thank you, everybody, for coming to this session. Adam Twardoch will speak about making your variable fonts better. This is a companion talk to his more of a workshop session on Wednesday, I believe, which is using your variable fonts better. So this session is aimed at people that make fonts primarily, although people that use them intensively will certainly find some interesting material here. But if you're primarily concerned with using them, then maybe watch his Wednesday session as well. I've known Adam for many years. I first came across him as a rare voice at that time from Poland, who was badgering from his position as a student, still an undergrad, he was badgering Silicon Valley companies, including Adobe and Microsoft, on the designs of their ogonek. So that's the particularly Polish diacritic that comes at the bottom of A, E, and certain other letters.
Lithuanian as well, a few.
Lithuanian. Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, Adam was unimpressed by the ogoneks that he saw in system fonts and other well-known fonts, so started making a noise about it and proposing some much better designs, which got taken up. So those were professional contributions from Adam while he was still an undergrad, and he got the label, got the name Mr. Ogonek at an early stage. I was looking for someone who could handle certain international issues, internationalization issues better than I could at MyFont. So we've been working together since the early days of MyFonts, and Adam has always been a useful voice to have around there. So he's since then he's been working for many years with FontLab, and I'm also indebted to Adam for his pushing back in 2013. He was an articulate voice for pushing for the return of what we now call as variable fonts. So I'm grateful to you, Adam. Thank you for that, for making my life more interesting, for that effort paying off in a very nice way. And I'd also like to recommend Adam's Digital Legacies talk from Antwerp in 2018. That was a great survey of font editors over the years. A really nice bit of work. So Adam's been involved not just through FontLab, but in other projects, helping numerous people all around the world produce their fonts, improve their fonts. So I'm really keen to see what he has to say about making our variable fonts better. So with that, over to you, Adam.
Hi, this is Adam, and today I want to show you how to use FontLab 7 and several other apps to check, proof your variable font projects. Since all popular font editors now have some mechanisms for designing variable fonts and exporting them as variable OpenType fonts and as static instances, you can use FontLab or any other font editor to develop or design the variable project. But then it's useful to test and check how a font performs in several apps. Here's a real use case scenario, the wonderful Stix 2 font developed by TypeWorks and available on GitHub in the VFJ format. So when I open it in FontLab 7 and open the variations workspace, I can customize it a little bit. Also need the preview panel. I can right click on any of the panel headings or use the window menu. In the Layers and Masters panel, I can click on different masters to switch them, or I can click on the special instance layer, which shows me the dynamic instance chosen in the variations panel. I can customize the preview panel, I can fill the preview or show nodes. And whenever I select a glyph, the current instance will be shown in the preview panel. When I turn on the interpolation preview, like here with the Anybody font by Tyler Fink, I can plot a vector, interpolation vector on the variations panel, and then see how the font interpolates along that vector. And I can choose it freely. I can also set which axes are visible on the X and Y of the map of the variations panel. But when I turn on the instance preview and then switch to the list view, I can preview either any master or any predefined instance, or I can click the play button to variate along that axis. I can play or pause the animation along a single axis, or I can also alt-click to play or pause the animation along all axes. So this way, I can smoothly see any of the selected glyphs or the current glyph as they variate. This is, by the way, a variable TTF that I've opened, but you can also open Glyphs files or design space with UFO. In the font window, you may want to switch between the different modes at the bottom right, the cell proportions, and also between how the columns are shown. Choose the numeric settings to have a fixed number of columns in the font window, which you can change with Command+, Command-. Or if you switch to the flex view, then you can use a slider and you get a finer granularity in the Command+ and - zooming. Now remember that the Layers and Masters panel shows what the current layer is in the font window and also in the Glyphs window. And in order to see the instance that you choose in the Variations panel, in the Layers and Masters panel, you need to activate the instance layer. It's a read-only layer, so when you want to edit a master, you need to choose it again. When the instance layer is active in the Layers and Masters panel, the play and pause buttons work also in the font window cells, so you get the live interpolation. You can see how your glyphs change, and you can easily spot some potentially problematic situations. Switch back to a master in the font window sidebar, click the refresh button next to properties, and then you can filter the font window, click hide unfiltered glyphs to only show the glyphs that are filtered, and then click a property such as composite to only see the composite glyphs, or non-composite to only see the glyphs that are made out of contours. Select all with the filter applied. Click the contour tool to open all the non-composite glyphs in the glyph window. By default, the nodes and details of the current glyph are visible. Turn on Edit Across Glyphs to see nodes and details of all the glyphs in the glyph window. Now comes some glyph window wrapping magic. So by default, the glyph window wraps manually, so only if you hit an enter in the text mode. But if you turn it to auto, then the actual text size zoom level, which is Command 1 or Control 1 on Windows, the text wraps at the current window width. But of course, each master can have a different width. So if you play the variation animation, the text in the glyph window with auto wrapping continues to reflow. There's a nice solution to that. In text wrap, choose apply, and best do it with the widest master selected, and FontLab will insert line breaks into the text at the places where the automatic wrapping happens. Now when you play the animation, even with narrower masters, the reflow doesn't happen because there are hard line breaks in the text. If edit across glyphs is active, you can really study all the details, how the nodes interpolate, how the handles or off-curve points interpolate. If you turn it off, edit across glyphs, then you get the rendered preview and only the current glyph is visible with details. Yeah, I can see that there's something fishy with that CRA. If you have a new machine, then the animation should be fluid, even with a longer text and many axes. Sticks to on the left, times on the right. Very nice. If you have separate variable projects, in Font window, double-click on the Fonts panel to switch between the font windows. But in a Glyph window, click the Fonts panel to switch the font within the same Glyph window, keeping the text. Remember, to see the variation animation in the Glyph window, you have to select the instance layer, which is a read-only layer. Switch back to a master to edit. Of course, with the instance layer active, you can also preview metrics in the metrics mode of the Glyph window, and also kerning, and see how the values change. Change the size of the nodes in Glyph window preferences if you're taking the bird's eye view. If you have many overlapping glyphs or zero width glyphs, switch the text wrap to table to get every glyph in isolation, like font window cells, but in the Glyph window, so fully editable. Okay, let's make a recap of the variation model in FontLab. We have a neutral master. We have additional masters that are located on axes. Every axis has a two-letter code that's internal to FontLab and design coordinates. The locations of instances are also in design coordinates. An axis corresponds to a fvar axis with a four-letter tag which may be shared among HOI axes. The axis graph provides a mapping from design coordinates to user coordinates, which may be standardized for axes such as weight. That's done in the font info access page, where you also provide particles or style words for the stat table. The font info font masters page places the masters on design coordinates. The blue dot indicates the neutral or main master. The axis graph in the axis page provides the range of the user coordinates, which are used for extrapolation within FontLab, and also provide a mapping from design coordinates to user coordinates, which can be nonlinear and is then recorded in the AVAR table. The red dots indicate the range, the blue dots are the breakpoints for nonlinear AVAR mapping. Axis instances map phrases to design coordinates and are used to build the stat particles and can be used to generate a matrix of instances. So back to sticks. We have predefined instances, regular, medium, semi-bold, and bold. And we have two masters, regular and bold. In the weight axis graph, we're going to extend the design coordinates range to allow extrapolation. So 65 and 200, click OK, click Keep, open the graph again. Now in the user coordinates range, set the lower boundary to 300 for light and drag the point down, and set the upper boundary 900 for black and drag the point up. That already allows extrapolation within FontLab, but we also want instances. So we add a light and a black axis instance and then click From Axis on the Instances page. So with the instance layer active, I can now extrapolate, which is useful as a sort of Dwigham's formula or tool. Exaggerations become visible, and that points to problems. I notice other problems thanks to the variation animation and can fix such a problem quickly. Press 7 for Matchmaker, then adjust the view, turn on the auto matching features in variations panel, click Match Masters, done. The two auto matching settings work on the fly, or when you match masters, the changes are baked into the masters. Okay, still some review. There's something wrong with that G. Okay, switch back to a master rather than the instance layer. Double click because it's a component. Okay, we see there's something wrong. Activate the two auto matching options, turn them on, and match masters. Fixed. So, I'm sure someone told you that if you have like a regular and a bold, you can only make a variable font that goes between them. No extrapolation, right? Well, not quite. Go to File, Export Font As, and export as design space plus UFO. That will give you one design space file and two UFOs for your masters, right? Now export instances as UFO with subfolders by profile. You may turn off the instances between your real masters. Now replace the previously exported masters with the newly exported instances. Make a copy of the design space file and edit it in a text editor. So you need to change a few things in the design space. You need to change the minimum and also the map, which is the axis graph. You need to add a few masters like the black and the light using design coordinates. Oh, and the maximum. And then in terminal, use FontMake. Create a variable font out of the design space, and you'll get a variable font where the masters are the instances, including the extrapolated instances. Here's another tool you can use. Bulletproof Font Tester by Adam Jagosz. Go to bulletproof.italic.space. It's a web-based tool, so you need a real working variable font. And it so happens that we've just made one. Drop the editor. Set the font size a bit higher and go back to FontLab. Select all glyphs, open the text mode. In the glyph window sidebar, make the font larger, like 120 points, for example, and then apply the wrap. Finally, select all and choose text, copy as, Unicode text. This only copies the encoded characters of your font, so you can paste them into Bulletproof font tester or any other proofing app. The Bulletproof font tester is really cool. It inspects the font that you've dropped and builds a dynamic user interface that lists all the features that the font has and also all the variation axes. So you can apply features to the text, you can select the dynamic instance using a slider, and the tester uses the browser to render the text. So if you run it on Windows, you'll also see how the font looks on the Windows rasterizer. And since we have this font that has the design space exaggerated through extrapolation, we can easily spot potential problems. Then if we find a glyph that we don't like, we can copy it and look for it in FontLab using Command F or Control F on Windows. And then, well, check what's wrong. In this case, indeed, there's a mismatch between the two masters, which we will have to fix. Another cool tool by Adam Jagosz is wordfinder.italic.space, where you can find words that contain a specific letter combination from different languages and easily reuse them for spacing or kerning. And another indispensable tool for quality assurance of variable fonts is SAMSA by Lawrence Penny. This is a tool that uses its own engine for interpolation and therefore allows you a really deep introspection of variable fonts. That's the end of this presentation, but we have more for you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think you wanted me to give a quick little demo of SAMSA.
Yes, that would be great, because it's sort of like the user interface packs a few powerful things. If you know how to use it, it can be super useful. So perhaps you can screen share.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Do you see that all right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I won't take long with this. It's Adam's presentation, but Adam thought I might like to just demo this bit with, here's the font graduate, which you will find in the list of fonts in the fonts panel when you load SAMSA. There are several preloaded. You can also drag and drop your own, though, just like the Bulletproof tester and other testers drag and drop. One of the main things I wanted to show with SAMSA was how different sets of deltas add together. So you can see there's one set of deltas that is represented by those pink arrows. Then we're having another set of deltas added by these green arrows. And for those of you who saw the presentation by David Berlow and the Type Network team, this font graduate uses some of those Type Network axes, and it's a nice way to understand how they combine. Press spacebar to see the final glyph. So you can see how an individual point, we can turn on point numbers with that little checkbox there, is made up of, we look at point number 26 there in the middle of the screen. It's made up of 4 movements, which are the 4 axes that I have moved from their default positions. So it's a pink arrow, a green arrow, and a purple arrow. Sorry, just 3 movements in this case. So that's how they work visually. And that is, we can also see their numeric change as well. So if we change that first axis down to 0, we can see the pink arrows have become 0, all of them. And we can see their value in that panel at the bottom left changing up to their stored value. So that value they're at now, that will correspond to one of the masters in your font. Is there anything else you wanted me to show particularly in Sam? So I can talk for a couple of hours if anyone wants, but I think now is not the time.
Maybe just the the Explorer, the Axis Explorer, so the design map, because it sort of is a bit similar, I think, to how the map in the variations panel in FontLab is done. So it's not, so you can kind of decide what you have vertically or horizontally, right?
It is similar, yes. So that's this design panel, this design space section here, which is first of all this square shape of a graph, which has 0, 0 in the middle, maximum on the right, minimum on the left, maximum in Y, bottom there. So what this corresponds to is the.
It's just a two-dimensional slider. You could.
So it's a two-dimensional. So it's a two-dimensional controller that currently is set to control XOpaque in the X direction, left and right, XTRA, another axis in the vertical plane. One neat thing about it is that you can load up this controller with multiple axes. So it's now controlling 3 axes altogether as I move left and right.
Because you are using for this effectively the normalized axis values. So any axis you choose, the controller controls -1, 0 to 1, which is the internal.
That's correct. Yeah, that might be unfamiliar to some people. So if I go up to the axes section, we see all the axes in this font. This XOPQ axis goes from 100 to 900. Now, before it gets into the deep inside the variable font engine, it is transformed into a so-called normalized value. And we can see that normalized value by selecting norm from that button there. It didn't show the pop-up, but where my pointer is, number format, we choose norm, normalized. Now all our numbers are between -1 and +1, and those values are displayed on this graph. And it's also those values between -1 and +1 that are multiplied by the values that are actually stored deep inside the font. So it's basically a scale. We have to get from a nice value in so-called user space, which is 100 to 900. This is a value that's nice for users, to a value that's nice for the computer, which is a value between 0 and 1. That can become a scaling factor, like a percentage. The other thing to note about this interface is we have this plus and minus button, which is useful for just nudging it up and down by the smallest possible amount. Because the resolution of this isn't incredibly high, it only uses 16 bits. So it can be interesting to see what happens just if we nudge an axis a tiny little bit. I think I'll leave it there, Adam. Hand back to you. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thanks, Lawrence. One tool that I just wanted to very briefly mention, because I didn't mention it in my kind of talk, is font. Did it work? Oops. Just give me. Okay. Share. Yeah, it's Font Goggles by Joost van Rossum, which is wonderful. Well, the only kind of limitation is that it's Mac only, but at least for now. But it's fantastic, and one of the unique features that I haven't really seen done so well in other proofing and testing tools is the ability to compare different fonts. So here we have this on the top. I have loaded the extrapolated font and then the shipping versions, or the current versions, and then you can see how using the user coordinates, I can here vary in the intended or shipping design space from 400 to 700 for the shipping fonts, but then this extrapolated kind of hacky thing, which I think, within reason, this method that I've shown could be used also to create shipping fonts if the extrapolation is only quite little. But of course, I've made this point of this Dwiggins method, meaning, extrapolation. Years ago, I found it kind of, you may not notice something being slightly off or problematic when just interpolating, especially if the problem isn't big. But if you then use extrapolation, then some problems become more apparent. So it's very useful. And yes, so Font Goggles is open source and can be installed from GitHub from fontgoggles.org. So that's, and there's many more. There's also a web tool called Type Network, Type Tools, and there's many on the web. And I encourage you to use the web tools, especially with a different operating system, like with Windows, especially because if you're using a Mac, you may be kind of led into this illusion of sorts that your font just looks great on the Mac renderer, but it's always important to test at least on Windows because that's the majority platform that end users are using. So I'd like to. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Or
yeah, I must say your highlighting of animation and extrapolation for QA purposes, I think was really nicely done. So I think that's excellent. One question I had about extrapolation, is there an automatic way you can create a new FontLab project out of the extrapolated version, extrapolated font, and have that with new masters inside?
Oh, well, the way I've done it is I've kind of, so I exported the kind of the regular and the bold were the original master, and then the instances, also the black and the light, and I've kind of tweaked the design space and fed it to FontMake. But of course, I can open that design space in FontLab, and I'll just get a new editable project, and
right.
with all the if you keep the functionalities within UFO, then it's preserved. It would be also possible to do it fully within FontLab you can basically add, you can just choose any variation and add it as a new font master using the variations panel. There's a little export kind of arrow in the top right of the variations panel. You click it, you choose add font master, and that new instance, which may be outside the realms, outside the bounds, becomes a new font master. But then, of course,
kind of upgrading it.
Yes, but then, of course, it becomes kind of baked in. And of course, with this approach, especially for testing, I wanted to show that you can effectively just really design the regular and bold, so to speak, but kind of, or related situations, but kind of rely on the extrapolation just as much as interpolation, because, well, there's nothing principally wrong with extrapolation, as in, yes, it may lead to unexpected results, but they're just unexpected. They're not wrong. It's still interpolation. It's just one master, the regular and the black, bold, sorry, they influence the black and the light in a way, the same way as they do influence the medium. It's just harder to predict a little bit. So, so that's that. Yeah.
Did you? I know you've been working to some extent on improving the FontLab documentation with some new text and new videos. Did you want to mention anything about those?
Well, we've we've been publishing basically like a set of. We've been working with Dave Lawrence, who's a type designer from California Type Foundry, is his or calfonts.com, and he's been recording kind of tutorials, video tutorials that focus on the kind of design side of things, using FontLab 7 as a design app, and I'm working on some more kind of sort of technical and reference based tutorials, and if you go to fontlab.tv, there's about, I think, 40 of those published, and I've also collected there a collection of playlists with videos about type design and typography and history of type from different conferences. So basically, all the videos that are out there on YouTube, I've spent a few days organizing them into sensible playlists. So it's just that FontLab YouTube channel, or its shorthand fontlab.tv, is just a useful place to go if you want to find something, because sometimes those videos, when they get published on YouTube, they only have some inconspicuous title, no description. So I kind of try to, keep it all together so that we have this educational resource, because I think for the first time, this pandemic has been, really painful for some, but also suddenly, because the content is now more readily available and is often transmitted using audio-video equipment, so it's recorded, so it can be published, and that knowledge is made accessible to people who perhaps in the past years wouldn't have traveled to, a remote city.
It is a big change, and there are certainly some benefits. We would love to hear some questions from the audience, if there are any. This is your chance to get to the one of the two main FontLab guys.
Oh, there's Q&A. Hang on. There's what? Oh, there's chat, and there's also Q&A. Oh dear. Is SAMHSA, there are actually tons of questions. Is SAMHSA supporting rotated components?
Yeah, I've already replied to
okay.
that it doesn't at the moment. But if SAMHSA gets around to supporting the new color version 1 format, then rotated components are part of that specification. So that would be part of that work. If that is part of, yeah. So that's the path by which rotated components would come into SAMHSA.
Alexander Habre is actually asking a good question. Are the fonts you can test with these web tools uploaded to a server? I guess they are not uploaded. I think it's it depends on the particular. In most cases, I believe they're not, or there may be some little. I think maybe SAMHSA is using perhaps something different than the Bulletproof font tester. But these tools, at the very least, these tools, the libraries, the websites, the code that the websites use are open source, so you can check basically what they do. And I imagine that. What does SAMHSA do?
Well, most of them are open source.
Yes, of course.
Certainly SAMHSA, and before that Axis Praxis, it felt important to me, and it was appreciated by users that all stays in the browser. It doesn't go anywhere. It uses JavaScript to process the binary font data, and that is, I don't want to speak for other applications. I think the Font Gauntlet tools, they do upload it to the server, so that it can then use font tools on the server to make a instance if you want. So do check if you're worried about that. But I can say from the part of SAMHSA, it doesn't upload it anywhere.
I can't say for the tools by Adam Jagosz, who also happens to be Polish, but I know that his code is open source on GitHub, so we could check. But I believe he's using JavaScript libraries to parse the fonts, and therefore I don't think that he uploads them. Any possibility font parts will be supported by FontLab in the future? Well,
that question came up in Ben's talk about UFO, by the way, as well.
So, well, I need to sort of look at font parts again in terms of the model. I remember that there's been a debate between not just us but also Georg and some other people about a certain aspect, like an inadequacy or a disadvantage of the UFO model, which I'm not sure if it's still strictly reflected in font parts, and that's that basically sort of a font master equals a font, while in both FontLab and Glyphs, basically you have a font which is a collection of font masters, and then you have masters, and then you have Glyphs that usually have layers, etc. So that kind of master layer structure within one font is between FontLab and Glyphs. Actually, the structure, the object structure, is quite similar, while with RoboFont and font parts, it's slightly more different. But I think we can work around that. I've been thinking about this, and we did have an early implementation of parts of, well, it was parts of RoboFab within FontLab 7, but it could be resurrected. So there are chances. It's basically a question of, manpower, and since we're busy with so many things, this is such a big app and such a small company but yes, I would like to see, to once again have like a cross editor, simple API for writing scripts, because, the RoboFab project was wonderful in that sense, and font parts is kind of quite related to it, and it's a way to express simple operations, and not even just very simple, but sort of operations in code that is then cross app. So you just only need to learn something once, and that would be wonderful, and I would be all for it. So if you're interested, let me know.
One of the motivations for moving to UFO 4, which is far from this is very, very much under development, is that very thing. So to be less a masters based approach.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps when UFO 4 is finalized and font parts is upgraded, that would be the time when Glyphs and FontLab would happily incorporate it.
I agree. We've kind of, we've proposed a couple. It wouldn't need so many changes, because gradually, there's been this ideas that the design space file had been kind of at some point added as a bit of a glue between UFOs. But now it seems that design space file that can have its own lib, its own data that is not just for coordinating interpolation, that could become that one level that kind of, less data, less redundant data could be stored in the UFO. Like, for instance, the copyright string. Why is the copyright string stored in every single UFO, or just in one, the main one? If you switched, in FontLab, it's very easy to change. Okay, my neutral master is now this one. But if it's UFO, all that data would have to be transferred from one UFO to another. It's not very efficient. But if it was stored in something like the design space, then no problem, because that's the data that is unique per design space / variable font / variable font project or family. Okay, how many people are using SAMSA? The servers sometimes I try to, especially on Thursdays afternoon, I'm trying to go there. It's not possible. It's just like
that'll probably be the other projects on the shared server, Adam. But There's 156 watchers on GitHub. That's the only stat I know about. So I don't keep any other stats in terms of unique monthly visitors or this kind of data. So, yeah. I think we better wrap up fairly soon, Adam. It's 7 minutes to 8 here in Reading, and we need to give people a little break before they get to the next talk. So if there's any final questions, quick ones we can get to, and then we'll wrap up.
And I'll just say that, if you're interested in sort of talking more about the kind of operating system support, also tools, but also end user apps, I have this other session, which is like a 2-hour session on Wednesday, a bit earlier. It's on the agenda. I never remember the time zone stuff, but you're most welcome to join, and we could, talk in a more kind of informal way about, what pieces of code support variable fonts, but also I think, what we could do if there are some apps that don't support or have support them, how we could motivate the developers to make it better, because otherwise it's always very problematic. If people are making variable fonts, but these variable fonts don't work everywhere, then end users are like, well, yeah, it's sort of nice in principle, but if it doesn't work in my app, then why do I care? Why should I care?
Adam's next talk is 10 a.m. New York time on Wednesday. So that is 3 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Central Europe on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Use your variable fonts better. What's the best way for people to keep in touch with what's going on in FontLab land?
That's a good question. Twitter, Facebook. We also have a newsletter you can subscribe to. But I think Twitter and Facebook are kind of the ones where we publicize the most.
Okay. All right. We'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for attending, everybody. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. See you soon.